and welcome to our Interviewing Insights webinar. We're so glad that you could join us this evening. I also have Nikita Cassidy up here with me. She's our coordinator in career services, and she will be assisting with the tech part of this evening. And let me just welcome everyone again. And we also have live captioning that we'll be doing. So definitely, make sure that you take advantage of that if you would like to have captions. So again, my name is Kelsey Richardson, career advisor, and we have a really packed evening for you tonight in terms of interviewing tips, because when it comes to interviews, they're a little tricky. And so we want to make sure that you have as much advice as you can going into your next set of interviews. So we are going to cover tonight preparing for an interview, proper interview attire, telephone and virtual interviews, responding effectively to challenging questions, interviewing best practices, closing the interview and follow-up, and then we'll have a Q&A. So I'll definitely save some time at the end so that I can answer your questions. So feel free to put your questions in the chat field, and we'll make sure that I get to them before we finish the webinar. I'll get to as many questions as I possibly can. And the other thing I want to mention to you is that we will be sending you a copy of this recording afterwards as a follow-up, along with a copy of the PowerPoint and a handout that has more detailed interviewing tips information. So definitely look forward to receiving that as well. Okay, so preparing for an interview. So your role in the interview is really to promote yourself, right? And gain more knowledge about the organization and position, while the interviewer's role is to learn more about you. So it's usually better to calm your nerves if you view the interview more as a conversation rather than what sometimes can feel like an interrogation. That sometimes does put you more at ease, because remember, like, you do need to promote yourself and you need to talk about your skills and your abilities and why you would be a great fit for this position and for the organization. But remember, you're also gaining more knowledge about their organization and about the interviewer. And so you're assessing from your side what it is that appeals to you about this particular opportunity and whether it seems like the right fit to you, while the interviewer's role is to be assessing whether they think you're the right fit for them. So it really is a two-way conversation. So definitely think of it that way. And preparing carefully for the interview will definitely increase your confidence level overall. So let's talk more specifically about how best to prepare. So self-assessment and employer research are two of the most important steps in preparing for your interview. So for self-assessment, you really need to make sure that you feel like you know yourself, your strengths, weaknesses, career goals, and definitely take that time before your interview to go over, take some notes to yourself about top strengths that you can mention if they ask you what your strengths are. Have a weakness to be able to offer if they ask you that question. And they might ask you about your career goals as well. So definitely be very clear on those. And you'll want to just make sure that you either take the notes to yourself or just take a quiet moment to really think it through, because you'll be able to communicate it much more clearly when you do that. And then you also want to make sure you do enough employer research so that you have an extensive amount of information about the organization and the position. So you want to do that in a combination of ways. You want to do internet research. So you want to, like, obviously go to their website and you want to look through their website really carefully. You want to do some Google searches on them and just see, like, do you see any recent articles popping up? Do you see any additional information about the organization that Google's bringing up that you can click into and learn more about? And if there are any recent articles that come up, read some of them, and gather some more information that way about them. And then LinkedIn is definitely a really important way to gain more information about them too. And if you have the names of the people that you're interviewing with, I mean, I'm sure you'll have at least one name. Sometimes if you're being interviewed by a few people, they don't necessarily give you everyone's name. But if they do happen to, if you're being interviewed by 4 people, more of like a search committee, then, and they've given you the 4 people's names, look the 4 people up on LinkedIn and just see if you can learn more information about them before the interview, just in case, have something else in common, or there's something really interesting about their background. And if it feels appropriate to ask them, whether it's a school they went to, maybe they went to SPS also, or, whatever it is. So definitely do your research and learn more about them so that you feel very prepared, because there's sometimes when employers start off an interview and they say, so tell me what you know about us. And if they were to ask you that and you haven't done your research thoroughly, then the interview is not going to start off very well. So you want to definitely make sure you're always prepared, just in case they should start it off that way. And then even if they don't start it off that way, usually during the course of the interview, they'll want some information from you about what you know of them and what it is about them that made you decide to apply. Okay, so other preparation tips. Make sure that you're able to discuss from memory everything that's on your resume. So you want to make sure that the night before every interview that you have, you take out your resume, even though I know you've lived your resume. So obviously you know your resume, but sometimes if it's been a while since you've interviewed, it's not fresh at the top of your head. So definitely take out your resume, just read through it again, refresh your memory about your most recent places you've worked and what you did there, just so that your answers off your tongue more. You also want to be thinking about why you want to work for the organization, what you have to offer, why you're the best fit for the position, those kinds of things, so that you're prepared to discuss those if you're asked. You also want to allow more than enough time to be punctual for the interview. So if it's an in-person interview and you find yourself detained en route, you definitely want to make sure that you stop and take out your cell phone and call them and just notify them of your delay, because this is the first impression, obviously, that you're making when you go for your interview. And so if you show up late and you haven't called to notify them, you haven't let them know, then they'll wonder, what would it be like if they hired you? Would you be responsible enough to inform them of something like that if you had a client meeting or something? So you definitely want to make sure that you do that. And then just in terms of making sure that you leave more than enough time, if you live in Brooklyn and you have an interview in Manhattan, and normally it takes you about 5 minutes to get to Manhattan, or to get to the part of Manhattan where the interview is, then I would say, add at least, another 40 to 45 minutes to that time. So maybe leave an hour and a half in advance, because, there are always subway delays or bus delays, or, however you're traveling around. It's just so typical for New York City. So you just want to make sure that you over prepare that. And then if you get there early, you can always go into a Starbucks, or, you can find somewhere to browse around for a bit before you walk into the building to go for your interview. And then if it's a virtual interview, make sure that you allow enough time, in the sense that you prepare everything in advance, so that when your interview time actually arrives, you are ready. You can just log right into Zoom or Skype, or however they're interviewing you, and you're ready. Your lighting's ready and your sound is ready, and everything's quiet, and you're in a place where you're not going to be distracted. But we'll go over more specifically virtual interview tips as well. And then you want to make sure that you practice. So I always say, for interviewing, you can never practice enough. So definitely practice as much as possible, because the more you practice, then the more at ease it will make you, because you'll feel more prepared. So definitely practice. So let's talk about proper attire. So you should be prepared to wear a professional business attire for your interview. And business attire meaning more business, not business proper attire, but more business casual. And this is for a virtual interview or an in-person interview. You just want to make sure that you wear, you know, professional looking clothing, because your clothing choices need to reflect that positive professional image. And you want to make sure that your interviewer feels like you'd fit in as one of their team members. And so if you were to dress casually and, you know, not wear appropriate business attire for an interview, then they would wonder, if they hired you, you know, what would you dress like once you were actually an employee, you know, because for an interview, you want to actually be stepping it up and be a little bit more formal than you would once you would get the job. So definitely, and you want to be careful of like color choices that you'd wear in terms of, you know, you don't want to go with colors that are too bright. You know, a lot of the sort of what I call the safe colors for business attire are more like the grays and the blacks and blue, you know, blues, like darker blues, darker purples, you know, colors like that. It's like reds, bright reds, yellows, fuchsia, like all of those I would avoid, unless, of course, you know, you're in a more creative industry. And then for some of the creative industries, obviously, you know, the rules are different there. But for most positions, for interviews, you just want to go a bit more conservative with the colors and just kind of tone it down, because you just don't want what you're wearing to be distracting. You just want to look neat and professional. And then also you want to make sure that you are kind of conservative with makeup and jewelry, that you don't, you know, wear too much, and that you also bring a briefcase or professional style bag, nothing that's bulky or not like a casual backpack or anything like that, because, you know, they're going to be assessing what you're wearing and, you know, what kind of bag you bring, just in terms of, you know, do you look appropriate? And so you just want to ensure that you do. So, you know, just keep your choices in mind to make sure that they are definitely appropriate for the kind of job that you're going for. Okay, so let's talk a bit about telephone interviews. So you want to make sure that if you've been scheduled for a telephone interview, that you set aside time and space where it'll be quiet, free of distraction. Keep a glass of water nearby in case, you know, you need to take a sip of it. Have a copy of your resume handy. The great thing about a telephone interview is they can't see you, so you can have like all of your quote unquote cheat sheets right in front of you. So you can have a copy of your resume. You can have notes that you've taken about answers that you'd want to give to certain questions, just so that it can jog your memory. You can have the job description of the position that you're applying for. You can have any other research notes that you've taken about the company. So definitely have all those materials near you for a phone interview, just so that you can refer to them if it's helpful. Another thing to remember is to smile during a telephone interview, which you might not think of because it's a telephone interview and they can't see you. But the thing about it is that negativity comes across on the phone, just in terms of tone. And when you smile, you can hear a bit of a lift in the voice. And so, you know, if I'm just sort of speaking normally, I would speak like this. But if I smile, you can sort of hear a little bit of a difference there. And so, you know, just smile here and there as you have your telephone interview. And if there's a way for you to find a way to have a happy mood before the call, maybe dressing up might make you feel more confident and more in that professional mode before you would have your call, then do that. But definitely whatever kind of gets you focused. In terms of a cell phone, be sure that there's no wind, your battery's charged, that the service is strong for the call. And, you know, things like no gum chewing, don't smoke a cigarette, don't eat any food. You'd be surprised at the things that sometimes people do during telephone interviews, thinking, well, it's just a telephone, so it doesn't really matter. But it does, because anything like that is distracting. Even like your earring hitting against the cell phone can be distracting. So, remove that earring of the ear that you put the phone to, and just, make sure that you're ready and there are no distractions of any sort like that going on. You also want to make sure that you're listening really carefully, that you don't interrupt the interviewer, speak slowly and articulately. And once you finish an answer, allow for a brief pause. Because it's the telephone, you don't have the visual cues that you would have if you were in person, or even, if you were over Zoom. So allow for a pause so that they can respond and ask you the next question. And you also, because it's a phone interview, you can consider taking notes on the questions they're asking you, or, if something's occurring to you that you think it would be helpful to review afterwards, as long as it doesn't distract you from being present. If you're kind of good at doing a few things at once, if you're like the ultimate multitasker and taking notes you think would be helpful for you and you can easily do it, then definitely do it, because they can't see that you're doing that, so that's fine. Now, when they can see you though, when it's a virtual interview, I wouldn't recommend taking notes unless it's a situation where at the end of the interview, they say, okay, well, we would like to have you meet with these other two people next who are also managers on the team. Then you can write down their names and their information and that kind of thing. But in terms of as they're interviewing you and as they're asking questions, I wouldn't take notes if they can see you, either for the in-person interview or virtually. So also never put the interviewer on hold. Just, keep your interview going, because remember, since you're being interviewed, like as the interviewer, they're in charge, they're running the process. So you don't want to be putting them on hold and kind of taking over the interview process in a way. It would be considered disrespectful. And to not use a speakerphone either. It's better, regular conversation into your phone. They may be using a speakerphone on their end, and they can do that. They're the interviewer, but you don't want to do that from your end. And you always want to find out their name and contact information to send the follow-up thank you note or thank you email, really. So make sure that if you don't have that information fully from when they set it up with you, you get that information. You can always ask that at the end of the interview. And then for unexpected phone interviews, if you know that you've sent out a bunch of your resumes and you're expecting to get calls and emails for interviews to be set up, sometimes employers want to screen by just trying to give you a call and just speaking to you for a few minutes, and then they'll decide sort of from speaking with you for a few minutes whether they're going to actually schedule you for an interview. So, in case that should happen, just while you're in an active job search, just have a copy of your resume with you, pen, paper, and some basic information about your job search so that it's handy for you. And if your phone, if you should see a number on your phone and you recognize that it looks like it's from the organization, one of the ones that you actually have sent your resume to, and maybe it's an employer calling you for an interview, then if you're not able to speak with them, let them leave a message, and you can call them back, and just call them back as soon as you can when you're prepared. You don't want to answer them while you're in the middle of, commuting or something, and you can barely hear them and they won't be able to hear you well, or, where you're distracted in any way. So you just want to make sure that you're prepared. If you are like in a quiet place though, where you can take that call, definitely answer, take the call, and speak with them. But if you're not, just let them leave that voicemail and you can call them back when you are prepared. So let's touch on virtual interviews. So for virtual interviews, you want to make sure that you also find a quiet, private place. But in this case, it needs to be well lit, because you do want to make sure that they can see you well and that it's also free from possible interruptions of any sort. You want to ensure that your internet connection is stable. So make sure that you check that. It would be terrible to be in the middle of a virtual interview and then suddenly get disconnected, have your internet connection fail. Check that your computer's audio is working, so you make sure that they'll be able to hear you well. Test your computer's webcam, make sure so that they'd be able to see you fine. And close any unnecessary web browser tabs or applications, because that tends to make your computer run slower and can be distracting, during this, and you want to be as focused as possible. And again, dressing professionally, but avoiding any bright colors. And have a pen, notepad, copy of your resume next to you. And it's fine, to have your resume there. For just like for an in-person interview, you can have your resume in, like a portfolio type folder on a table. That's absolutely fine. And if you wanted to refer to it for something, you could always do that. You can glance at it. That's absolutely fine. But definitely, you want to make sure that there is a notepad and pen that you do have available in case you do need to jot down the next person that you're going to meet with, or there's some critical information that they'll give you. So definitely have that. And then when you're listening for a virtual interview, make sure that you remember to nod and smile to show that you're engaged in the conversation, because it just, because since you're not physically in the same place, body language doesn't come across as strongly. So you definitely want to, nod, smile, and just make that you kind of make an extra effort to be engaged with your interviewer. And then feel free to use hand gestures when appropriate. You don't want to overuse hand gestures because that's distracting, and it will look unprofessional. But definitely, don't be too stiff. Use your hand gestures when it does feel appropriate to do that as you're illustrating a point, answering their questions. And also remember to place your phone in silent mode so that your phone doesn't suddenly start ringing and distracting you while you're in the middle of your virtual interview. Okay, so the next thing we want to cover is responding effectively to challenging questions. So the first thing to remember about answering any of their questions really is that you need to be able to effectively respond to the following types of questions that we're going to touch on in a moment, but always support your responses with specific examples. So you don't want to just answer the question and then not give an example of how that is the case, because when you give examples of things, it just makes what you're saying much more compelling. It makes it much more so that you can really illustrate that you really have the skill, or that you've really worked on that project, rather than generally answering the question. So let's first talk about the challenging questions that are more in the general category, and then we'll cover the behavioral questions next. So for the general questions, number one there, tell me about yourself. Now that's one of the most commonly asked interview questions. And it's also, I think, one of the most hated questions by people being interviewed. So try to think of when you hear an interviewer say, why don't we start off by you telling me about yourself? Think of this as them saying, tell me about your professional self, because that's what they're asking, is they're asking, tell me about your professional self. So what they really want to know is they want to know, where are you either currently working, for you to just talk a bit about it, or if you're not currently working, where were you most recently working? And are you currently finishing your degree? Did you recently finish your degree? So they really wanted you to touch on the work that you either currently or most recently have done, and schooling that you either are currently doing or have recently completed. So if you start off and I mean, part of the reason they don't ask this question and say, tell me about your professional self, is because they want to see how you respond to it. And some people will say, well, I grew up in Queens and I have, 5 brothers and sisters, a very large family, and I have 3 children now. And, and you don't want to go into any of that. I mean, you can definitely say, I'm originally from Queens, And currently, I'm a student at the CUNY School of Professional Studies, and I'm going to be completing my degree at the end of next semester. And right now, I'm working at a law firm, and I'm doing administrative work there, and I've been really enjoying it. And I was really happy to see your position listing because it looks like a really wonderful opportunity, and I'm excited to hear more about it. So, you want your answer to be pretty brief, but you just want to touch on, again, like schooling, work, and then sometimes it's hard to figure out, like, how do I stop this answer? And one of the best ways really is to just say that you were really happy to see their job posting, and you're really glad to be there to learn more about the opportunity. Okay, so number 2 there, what are your strengths and weaknesses? So if they say, can you tell me what your 3 top strengths are, or your 3 top skills, then this is where, you definitely want to make sure you're giving examples. You don't want to just say, well, my top skills are organizational skills, analytical skills, and computer skills. And then that's it, right? Because anybody can say that. But if you give examples and you say organizational skills, for instance, I set up a system for, something or other at your current job, and computer skills, I've learned several new programs, and I love learning new computer programs, and it's something that comes very naturally to me. So again, just like support all the skills that you're giving with examples of how you've demonstrated that skill. And then if they say, after you're done with that, if they say, give me an example of a weakness, then you want to make sure that you do have a weakness in mind to talk about. So what I always say for this is you want to choose something that's safe. And by safe, I mean something that isn't something that they would make them doubt your ability to do the job that they're trying to hire you for. So, if it's perfectionism, which is, sometimes people say it's cliche, but I say if you actually are a perfectionist and they ask you what a weakness is, you can say perfectionism. But again, it has to be true, because if it's not, then you're not really going to be able to turn it around to a positive in a way that's convincing. So, if you said, well, I'd have to say I'm a perfectionist, it's just so important to me to make sure that I really, with my strong work ethic, I really do above and beyond, in terms of all the work that I create and produce. But so sometimes I don't have as much free time as I would like, but I make sure that I meet all my deadlines, and I really make sure that I do a very effective job. So, if that's true about you, you could say that. You could also choose something that is not a responsibility of the position that you're applying for, but it's something you'd like to develop more in the future. So, like, for instance, let's say you don't know a second language, and they say, give me an example of a weakness. You could say, well, I'd have to say, I'd really like to learn a second language. I haven't had the opportunity to do that yet, but that's definitely something I would look forward to, especially, as globalization is something that's more and more important in the business world. I definitely, would look forward to that opportunity. So you could choose something like that, or public speaking is another one. Now, you wouldn't want to choose public speaking, again, if it's part of the job that you would be being hired for, because if you say it's a weakness, then obviously they would worry that you couldn't do the job well. Like if I had applied for this job for career services and I said, oh, my weakness is speaking, I would not be in this job talking to you right now. So you don't want to do that. But if it's, a position that's very computer oriented, or just has a focus that does not include public speaking, then you could say, well, I'd say weaknesses. I haven't had as much of an opportunity to enhance my public speaking skills as much as I would like. So I definitely would look forward to more opportunities to be able to do that. So, again, you can choose something that you haven't had the opportunity to develop yet, but again, it just can't be something that's a major part of the job that you're doing, that you would be doing. So number 3 there, what makes you the best candidate for the position? That sounds like an intimidating question, but just think of this as the fact that you being the best candidate for the position really is because you have the right skills that they're looking for, right? Like you would be a really good fit. And so that's really what they want to know about. So if they say what makes you the best candidate for the position, you should just tell them what skills you have that make you the best candidate, because you have those skills, and you're excellent communicator, or you have really strong analytical skills, you're a really strong writer, whatever it is that's related to the position you're applying for. And you could also say, and I have an incredibly strong work ethic. So you can add in, or I'm a really good listener, if there's a lot of client work involved, or I have a lot of customer service experience, and so I know how important it is to really deliver excellent customer service. So, just think about also something that would distinguish you, in addition to the skills that you have, that is something like a work ethic that not everybody has, but also focus that answer on the skills. Number 4 there, what do you know about this company, right? They might start it off that way, or just might ask you that as, one of the 3rd, 4th, 5th questions. And so that's where your research will come in handy, and you'll be able to tell them more about what you know about them, their mission, their vision, and, the things that really drew you to want to apply to their organization. They might also ask you where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years? And in that case, you want to make sure that you don't get too specific, meaning you don't want to say, well, I'd like to be promoted, or I'd like your job, nothing like that. You want to say something like you would like to be in an organization, like theirs, where you'd be able to be in a position to take on more responsibility and, work with the team more and be able to contribute that much more to the organization. So it's about kind of taking on more responsibility and growing within the organization. And then number 6 there, why are you looking for a new job? Just remember, if they ask you that, to keep your answer focused more on the future. So you wouldn't want to say anything that's about the past, like, or, I don't like my boss, so, that's why I want a new job, or I'm tired of this organization, like nothing like that. It all should be that you're looking for a new opportunity. You're looking for a new job because you have recently completed a new degree and you wanted to get a position that's more aligned, with your new degree, whatever it is, but, something that's focused on where you're headed and your career goals and that kind of thing. Not about why you're actually leaving where you're leaving, but it's more about that you want an opportunity to go to so that you can develop more professionally. And then they ask you if you have any questions at the end, and you want to make sure that you do have questions ready to ask them. And so we're going to touch on those also in a little bit, but just make sure that you do over prepare that and have several questions that you are prepared to ask, because if you prepare only 2 or 3 questions to ask them, then they might be a really talkative interviewer and they might really answer all 3 of your questions. Just coincidentally, they just happen to do that. Then when they say at the end, do you have any questions for me? You won't have any prepared because you only prepared 3. So I always say over prepare that, like prepare 6 or 7. And then the chances of them answering all 6 or 7 of your questions, that would be really rare. So that way, if they happen to answer half of them, then you still have half of them left that you can still ask. Okay, so let's touch on behavioral questions. So for the behavioral questions, you want to make sure, again, that you are specifically giving responses that you'll see that these start with describe a time when, or tell me about something you tried, tell me about a time when, because they really want to understand, have you done something like this, like what they would ask you to do in this new position in your past. And then that, is often for employers a nice predictor of whether you'd be able to do it well in their organization. So describe a time when you were faced with a stressful situation that demonstrates your coping skills. So you would want to give them an example of a time from either, a job that you've had, a job that you're currently in, or it can be related to school as well. You just want to make sure, again, that it is as relevant as possible. And also, when they're asking you any of these questions, whether it's the general questions or the behavioral, just always think of like the psychology behind the question. Why are they asking you this? Well, they're asking you this because they want to know whether you could handle the responsibilities they would give you in the new position. So if you describe a stressful situation that you've done in your present job that you've dealt with, that seems like it would be something that you might with in the job you're applying for, that's the best choice for, to answer this question, because that makes it as relevant as it possibly could be. So kind of think about that. Tell me about something you've tried to accomplish but failed. So for that question, you want to make sure that don't choose something that was kind of your fault that it failed. So what I mean by that is if they say, tell me about something you tried to accomplish, you could, if there's like a project that your boss asked you to work on, but the budget changed, and unfortunately the budget, there wasn't much funding available as originally was thought, then you could use something like that as an example. And you could say, well, there was this project, and I started off and I had a larger budget, and so I thought I would be able to accomplish this, that, and the other thing, but unfortunately, the budget was reduced, and so I wasn't able to do what I originally set out to do. But instead, I did this, and it was very successful in that way. So you have to, so it's kind of like the weakness question. You have to kind of turn it around to a positive. So number 3 here, describe a time when you had to deal with a very irate customer or coworker. So with that one, describe a situation, again, as relevant as possible to the type of job that you're applying for, that's from your current job or previous job or from school. And definitely make sure that with this kind of answer that you don't speak about the irate customer or coworker or student colleague, whatever example you're going to give, that you don't speak about them in a negative way. You want to just kind of describe it more factually, and then just talk about how you effectively dealt with them. You listened and you made sure that the situation was taken care of and that you resolved it. Focus on that, not describing how awful they were in it. So make sure that that's your focus, is on how effective you were. And then tell me about a time when you set a goal and achieved it. So for that one, again, you want to make sure it's a relevant goal. So a professional goal would be best, or, a goal on a job that you've had, or one thing, related to your academic life could be if you went back to school, to get your degree and to finish your degree. Set that goal and you achieved it and you graduated, last spring or something. So you can choose anything that's related to academics or to your work life. and just talk about achieving it, and how effective you were in doing that. But you want to choose anything personal because, sometimes um, sometimes students will ask me, well, can it be related to family or how proud I am of my children and what that, and you don't want to bring any of that up just because this is supposed to be focused on you and your professional self. And so you just don't want to bring, personal details into it. The only exception that I would say for that is just for athletics, for instance. Athletics tends to be a more neutral kind of category that is a safe category. So if you run marathons, for instance, that would be something that you could definitely use as an example, because it's it's just one of those things that employers often think illustrates your discipline that you would also display in a job that you would take. So if there's some kind of ethical that you've set and achieved, then you can use that as an example too. But work examples are best, or school examples, because they do tend to be the most relevant. And then give me an example of a time when you used good judgment and logic to solve a problem. Again, just try to think of something as relevant as possible to the job you're applying for. And what I would say is, with all the behavioral questions, go through them, before you start going on your next round of interviews, and really come up with what examples you could be giving to answer these questions. And if you were to go through just even these guys, because the handout that you're going to receive as a follow-up, to this webinar will have even more questions, but just even these 5, if you were to just map out, okay, well, if they ask me this is what I would refer to, and this is what I would refer to, and that's what I would refer to, then even if they don't ask you these exact things, you'll still have a lot to draw on for questions they may ask you that are behavioral, but not these exact questions. So it's a really good exercise to go through it very carefully. And then potential questions to ask the interviewer. So again, as I was saying, when they say, do you have any questions for me? These are some of the types of questions that you would ask them. You could ask them, what would a typical workday be like for a person in this position? What would you consider some of the major challenges and rewards of this job? What are some of the responsibilities of the people I would work most closely with? What do you hope I might accomplish in this position in 3 months, 6 months, a year? When do you expect to make a decision on selecting a person for this position? And definitely, like, questions that are related to number 5 there, you want to ask that as like your last question. So when they say, do you have any questions for me, don't make that your first question. Ask other things about the typical day, or if it's something about their mission or their vision for the organization. And then, do you have any other questions? And then as your last question, you could say, I was wondering if you know when you expect to make a decision on when you're going to select a person for this position. So that's a nice closing question. And it gives you an idea of the timing too of when they're expecting to hire, which can be really helpful to you. So in terms of best practices, on the day of your interview, you want to make sure, of course, that you know where you're going if it's an in-person interview, and that you do arrive at your destination approximately 10 to 15 minutes early, so you have enough time to get through security, up into the building, and that you're there, more than on time. And then just remember, first impressions are extremely important always, because they don't know you, they're first meeting you, and the first impression really, it definitely makes a difference when you have a positive first impression. So if you're waiting in, a waiting area, when the interviewer calls your name, stand up, establish that eye contact, remember to smile and greet them well, because again, it's, it's their first impression of you as they greet you. So for some do's and don'ts, make sure that you are very aware of your body language when you are particularly in person, but also for virtual interviews, that you're maintaining eye contact, you're showing positive body language in terms of posture, and that you are attentive, alert, courteous. And if you're asked to complete an application, usually that's almost always done online now, but every once in a while you come across an employer that wants you to fill out a bit of paperwork if you're doing an in-person interview, and just make sure that you answer all the questions that they want you to, even if they have a copy of your resume. You just, whatever they're sort of asking you to do, you don't want to ever say, oh, well, why don't you just take my resume? It's all there. You don't want to ever be not cooperative during whatever aspect of the process they're asking you to complete, because if you are not cooperative, then they will be concerned that if they hired you, are you going to be one of those employees that's always causing trouble and, resist things and, won't just kind of follow some instructions and, handle things professionally. So make sure that you just, go ahead and complete whatever they're asking you to do. And also make sure you're stressing your qualifications without exaggeration. You don't want to claim that you have skills that you don't have, or that you're an expert in certain computer programs if you're not. Proficient, is fine, if that's true. And then you want to be prepared to discuss the salary range that you want, but you don't bring up that unless the employer has introduced the subject. So, salary and benefits, those are the taboo areas. And you just want to make sure that if they say, so, can you tell me what kind of salary you're looking for? Then you have a range to give them. Do your research in advance. You can go to salary.com and you can look up typical salary ranges, and you can give them a range. You don't ever want to just give them one number. I'm looking for $55,000 a year, or $61,000 a year, or 45,000, whatever it is. You don't want to do that. You would want to say 45 to 50, or 55 to 60, or 60 to 65, whatever, depending on your experience level and the type of position you're going for, and the type of organization it is. So just be prepared for that. The problem is that if you were to just ask them, to say, do you have any questions for me? And then you said, yeah, I was wondering what the pay is for this. Then that would be a problem, because they would wonder, oh, are you just applying for a job just because money's all you're interested in? Even though, let's face it, we all work, we do need to earn a living, but they want to feel like you're more interested in the organization's mission and the job that you would be doing and the people that you'd be working with, the teamwork and all of that, and not so focused on the salary or the benefits. And then for the don'ts, you want to make sure that you don't complain about anything, not the weather, not your training, not former employers or any personal problems. Sometimes recruiters, particularly, like, if there's a position that you're interviewing for and you're interviewing, especially like with HR first, sometimes HR recruiters will try techniques where they'll try to make you feel relaxed or something. Like, you could complain about a former employer, or try to sort of see if you'll kind of relax and let the boundaries down, and just kind of get inappropriate. And you don't want to allow that to happen. You just always want to stay professional and not complain about anything or anyone. Just keep it positive, just talking about your current job, if you have one, or your previous jobs, in the best light possible, and just the experience that you've gained from those opportunities. You don't want to interrupt the interviewer or think ahead of the conversation. You want to make sure you stay present. You want to never be in a hurry to ask questions. Just wait until the employer invites them. So even though, I do want you to think of it as a conversation, it is a back and forth, in the sense that, they're asking you the question, you're answering their questions. You are gathering information, and you're trying to figure out whether it's the right fit while they're trying to figure that out too. But in terms of, like, when you ask them questions about the organization more, or about when they, expect to hire, all that, just wait till they invite you to do that. And usually that is at the end. So again, you don't want to become relaxed and informal by offering personal details about yourself. And, that's what I meant when I was saying some of the HR recruiters will try to sort of lead you down that path a bit, see if you will take the bait, so to speak. But you don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you just, remain very professional, and you just keep it focused on your work qualifications. And then make sure also that you don't offer any unfavorable information about yourself. So I know that sometimes, depending on your communication style, some people are sort of more like, well, I want to just tell it like it is. I want to be real with people. So, you might want to tell them that you're not so good at this thing, but you are really good at that, so that it's more balanced presentation of who you are. But this is the time to do that. This is the time actually when you want to emphasize your assets and how the employer can benefit from the skills that you have to offer. So you want to be your biggest advocate in the situation. You don't want to be offering, information about yourself, about the things that you're not as good at, because let's face it, I mean, all of us are strengths and we have other things that we're not as good at, but that's fine. But they don't need to know anything about that while they're interviewing you, because it's kind of like, when you meet an employer in the interviewing stage, you're trying to make that really positive first impression. And it's kind of like, dating is kind of like that too, where it's like at the very beginning, you're focused on the positive aspects and you're putting your best foot forward. And then as you build more of a relationship, so if the employer hires you and then you're an employee there, and then you get to know each other better and you're building a foundation of a relationship, that's when they'll start to know the things that maybe you're not as good at as other things. And that's fine because you have a foundation at that point, but you don't ever need to present like some balanced view of yourself in the interview situation. You actually really want to keep it focused on being like an advocate for yourself and really emphasizing your strengths that you have to offer. And then for closing the interview, you want to make sure to get business cards if it's in person, or again, get their contact information if it's virtual or over the phone, and thank them for their time. Make sure you send a thank you email. You could still send a letter, but 99% of employers are expecting it to be more of an email. It's faster and we're so digital these days. But usually within 24 hours, but definitely within 48 hours, you want to do that. And then you want to follow up by phone or email to make sure that you are, you stay on their radar. And, if you haven't been notified of the decision within a few weeks, definitely make sure that you do that follow up. Okay, so now I want to go to the chat and I want to see what questions you have here, so that we can make sure that if there's anything else that I should elaborate on. So there's a question about, what do you say if you're changing fields? So if you're changing fields, it's a really good question, because a lot of students, particularly, who are getting a new degree in a new area, are changing fields, and you're applying for positions that you have not done before. So what you want to do is you want to be emphasizing, what we call your transferable skills. So you don't ever want to be saying, oh, well, I'm new to this. Don't emphasize your newness. You just want to say, well, I'm really excited because I've just gotten my degree in this area, or I'm in the process of finishing my degree in this area. And I know that the work that I've done at such and such organization really helped me strengthen my communication skills, my organizational skills, my writing skills, my computer skills. All those are transferable skills, teamwork, all of that are very transferable to whatever field you're transferring to. So you want to just make sure that you're highlighting all of the transferable skills that you have, that you've been fine-tuning in school as well as in your current or previous positions, that will position you strongly for the change that you're making. So that's what I would say for that. So we have a couple more minutes. If there are any other questions, that's the only question I see so far. Anybody else have any other questions that you want to put in the chat there? Yep, looks like we have another one coming in. How would we answer leadership related questions? So it's another good question. So for leadership related questions, I would say that usually what they'd want is they want an example. Can you talk about your leadership skills or your leadership style? Just make sure you've thought through different examples of how you've demonstrated your leadership, whether you've been, the lead on different projects, whether they're projects in school, group projects, or whether it's projects at work. And you can talk through, how you've taken on the responsibility and how you served as an example for other people. So you definitely want to make sure that you just talk specifically, again, like offer examples of your leadership. And also just kind of read up about different types of leadership styles so that you can talk about what kind of leader you are, whether you are a person that leads more by example, or if you like to kind of walk people through what you're leading them in, whether it's a particular, again, like a project or some type of experience. So definitely, again, just make sure that you have examples ready to demonstrate. And then one more question here. I think we have, we've got time for another. Is it okay not to know the answer to something? Hold on. Is it okay to not to know the answer to something when they ask you specific questions? For example, do you know how to use the software tool they use? You may have a skill, but use a different software. So if they ask you if you know how to use a particular software program and you haven't used that particular one, you definitely, say, no, I have not used that yet, but I'd be very, very interested in learning it. And I learn software very quickly. And then just talk about, give an example of going to another job where you didn't know it and you learned it quickly, and maybe you taught other people, or however it is that you can describe how you're a quick learner and how you're able to do that well. So definitely feel free to do that, because it's important. They know that there isn't any way that every candidate could possibly know the software that they specifically use for that particular organization or department, or whatever it is. But as long as you can demonstrate that you're a quick learner and that you learn well, and that you're very interested in learning new software, then usually that's more than enough, that what they're looking for that. So great. All right, well, I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening for this webinar. I hope that it was really helpful to you to hear about more tips, because again, like, never have enough interviewing tips, because it is, a process that can be very nerve-wracking, but just know that, again, it is a two-way conversation that you're having. You're trying to figure out whether they're the right fit for you also, and that they would be fortunate to have you, because if you're coming to this interviewing webinar, then that says a lot about you, that you want to be able to put your best foot forward and be able to describe your skills and what you'd have to offer them well. And just practice, prepare. And I wish you the best on your upcoming interviews. And thank you for joining us this evening.